Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being on time. My name is Eric McVeigh. I manage special projects and membership development for the NFU Ontario. I would invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat at now or at any time. So you can say who you are, where you live or farm, and the kind of farming that you do, if you do, and also the name of the traditional Indigenous territory that you live in, if you know it. So I farm just east of Kingston, Ontario. We have vegetable CSA, community supported agriculture, and I live and farm in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. So I'm very excited about our panel tonight. We have some great panelists who have learned a lot about land partnerships. Much of the time at the end is going to be for discussion and chat, so you can really ask some questions and maybe share some of the things that you've learned as well. We're going to begin with a few quick introductions and context. So I'm just going to share my screen here with you. So as I mentioned, I work for the National Farmers Union Ontario. This is a joint project between the NFU Ontario and the Ontario Farmland Trust. So as you maybe know, the National Farmers Union was founded in 1969 nationally, but it's been around since 1952 in Ontario. It's a farmer-led organization, so that means it's farmers who make all of the decisions, but we also welcome associate members, people who maybe don't farm, but just care a lot about food and farm issues. It's a grassroots and democratic organization. That means that farmers are the ones who actually vote on our policy and our strategic directions, which happens at different conventions and at our local meetings. There are 22 different locals in Ontario. The NFU has a history of victories in farm policy, including things like supply management going back to the 60s, keeping bovine growth hormone out of Canada and out of milk in Canada, neonicotinoids, and also historically we've really valued and emphasized sustainability, food justice, health and food security, and success of rural communities, and the status of women and youth in the organization. We're also an accredited farm organization in Ontario, so if you're someone who is filling out your farm business registration forms this spring, we're one of the organizations that you can join. And we're doing this project in concert with the Ontario Farmland Trust. And Catherine Enders, the executive director, is online with us as well.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. The Ontario Farmland Trust has been around since about 2004, and we are the only registered charity in Ontario with a province-wide mission to protect Ontario farmlands. There's about 30 other land trusts in Ontario, but we focus exclusively on farmland. So we protect farmland through legal agreements called farmland easement agreements. And that's basically a legal document that's registered on the title of the property that makes sure that it remains as farmland forever. So it can never be developed or turned into an aggregate mine. So we protect farmland in perpetuity, and we have lots of farmers that we're working with to register those agreements this year. We also work on policy development with the government, and we do outreach and education, including our annual Farmland Forum, which is actually coming up at the end of March. We would love for some of you to join us there if you're able to. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Catherine. So this project actually started last year, this series of workshops, and decided to do this for a bunch of reasons, mostly because of things like the farm income crisis. Farmers haven't been making enough money consistently for a long time, which means that farmers are now often approaching retirement rather, without successors. There are more farmers over the age of 70 in Ontario than under the age of 35. We're also seeing farmland loss. 175 acres of farmland is lost to development in Ontario every day. And that farmland is getting much more expensive because of land speculation, development, and other factors. So the result has been that young and new farmers can't access land. So we decided to start in early 2020 a series of land linking workshops. So we say, hey, farmers are approaching retirement without successors. At the same time, young farmers can't access land. Let's see if we can bring those two groups together, try to find some matches, find some retiring farmers who are open to non-family succession or want to do partnerships. And so we did 5 workshops in person, face-to-face last year as part of this series, pre-COVID, which was wonderful. And we've all seen in follow-up that a lot of those participants, landholders in particular, have found potential matches. But of course, finding a potential match or even to farm with someone doesn't solve all of the problems. There's actually a lot more to that, to creating a good partnership or a good relationship that can stand the test of time. And so that's why we wanted to do our workshop evening with these 3 wonderful panelists. These are people who have created partnerships, who have worked in different kinds of innovative, creative ways, and have learned a lot of lessons that I think we can all take to heart. So I'm going to introduce our panelists all at the same time, but they will speak in this order. So our first speaker is going to be Alexandra Zalucky. Zandra is part of the Elmgrove Collective. That's a group of small-scale farming businesses who share land and a passion for sustainable growing in Sutton, Ontario. And then Erin Richan. Erin Richan is part of Highland Gem Farm. It's a first-generation family farm business growing vegetables and cut flowers for market and a summer CSA program in Lanark County, Ontario. And then Mike Degagne of the Black River Worker Co-op. It's a not-for-profit worker cooperative based in Matheson, Ontario, focused on reviving, developing, and sharing regenerative alternatives to farming and living. Mike also works with LFFC, Local Food and Farm Co-ops, and he'll be talking a little bit about that at the end. If you do have any questions, I invite you to type them in the chat. We're going to let all of the speakers speak, and then we'll answer questions and have discussions. So if you type into the chat your question, I will save it and make a point of coming back to it during the discussion Q&A period. I don't think that anyone called in on the phone, but if you are on the phone and you need to mute or unmute yourself, the key is to press *6. And then you can speak. All right. Thank you again so much for coming, everyone. And I'm going to pass it over to Zandra Zalucky to begin. Thank you, Zandra.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I think this is an exciting and very timely topic. And I will say, I know my little tag there says Alexandra Zalucky, but I do go by Zandra, everyone. So to begin, how I put together my presentation, I like to keep things simple, and also I'm quite tech unsavvy, so that's why I keep things simple. So how I went through this presentation is going through the questions that Eric first proposed to all of us to cover, and I'll just go through all of those questions and answer them specifically. So the first question we were asked was, how do things work on your farm? So a little bit on a farm description about Elmgrove Farm, and then I'll go into the farm operation. So we are a 50-acre farm. It's been farmed organically for over 50 years, starting with the previous owners, the Shorting Houses. We now grow mixed organic vegetables, raise sheep, have hens for eggs to sell. And the current owners, they've been here for 20 years, but they have worked here before with the previous owners, as the previous owners were close family friends. And myself, I've been on Elmgrove Farm for 10 years. I started as a volunteer in 2011. I was an intern in 2012, and then developed my own business in 2013. A little bit about the farm operation. We currently have 5 main businesses. Myself, my business is called Cultivating Opportunities, and I grow primarily mixed organic vegetables for market and for CSA. There's also the Cutting Veg, and they mostly grow wholesale, but also for market, and they specialize in garlic. Then there's the landowner's son who raises sheep. And we have our beekeeper, his business name is Sutton Honey. And finally, another grower who also specializes in garlic, and his business is Good Day Garlic. That's me in the photo there. So I will make a note here that we are a collective and not a cooperative. So each business is financially independent. And so we rent a portion of the land, and we pay a fee based on the size of the land that we're on. The second question we were asked was, how have you decided who to partner with? So a little bit on how the farm, or the current form of how we farm started, how this collective came to be, was the owner's son, him and his friends after university wanted to try growing organic vegetables and have a little business. So they did this for a year and then moved on to other projects. And so the landowners took over that business with the thought in mind that they'd like someone else to take over after that. And so looking for other farmers with similar values. And they looked into Farm Start, but then it was through word of mouth and serendipity that they found Daniel Hoffman of the Cutting Veg. And then the collective started from there, as he had an internship and a few of us stayed, and it just grew and grew through the years. So now how the process works, how the landowners would partner with more farmers would be either through a recommendation from one of us, from one of the current partners, or if it's someone that's new to us, then they would do a year volunteering on the farm, like a trial year, followed by another year where they can start their own little business. Or it could be a combination of both, depending on the individual. Now, one thing that's constantly been an issue over the years for new people is accommodation is an issue, as there really isn't much extra accommodation on the farm, and the distance an individual would have to travel to make a commitment here. Third question we were asked was, what kinds of things have the hosts offered and what have the hosts requested? So the hosts have offered land. So those are the landowners. That's Hans and Luce in the photo that you're looking at now. So they've offered us land, resource support in the form of a tractor that we can all use, although we don't, it's Hans will use it for us. A barn, a cooler room, to name a few things, as well as labor support. So if it's small things, we'll just help each other in kind. Whereas if there are larger asks, then it's either barter of time or some kind of financial compensation. What the landowners have requested is, as I mentioned, a fee based on the size of land that we're renting, volunteer hours, which is usually in the off season, and it varies on the season. And it's to help with any farm related chores, tasks, or projects. And finally, we'll each be asked to do a weekly farm task. And that could be taking the garbages out, or cleaning out our outhouse, or a general barn cleanup. So we each take on a task and do that throughout the growing season. Next, the fourth question was, what has gone well? What has been challenging? What have you learned? And what would you do differently in the future? So what has gone well? Hands down, the support has been invaluable. For someone like myself who started with no experience, I came on as an intern, to be able to grow through the years with all the support is, again, invaluable. I couldn't have gone to the place I am without the kind of support I've received. So it's the resource support, the knowledge I've gained from the others on the farm, as well as the community. So there's always somebody to celebrate with or to cry to when things don't go well, and to ask questions of, which I found very helpful. And also what has gone amazingly well are the landowners are incredible people. So their generosity and kindness have definitely been such a boon to all of us. What has been challenging? I guess it would be the lack of, that's my sister in the photo, my twin sister who comes and helps a lot. So challenging piece would be the lack of security. At the end of the day, it is a family farm, so things will develop as they will. And us businesses don't necessarily have a say. But that said, the landowners have been incredibly mindful and considerate and accommodating of our needs, and will always ask us to make sure that we're as little impacted as possible. What have I learned? That you can't farm on your own. I kept on trying to, and learned that this is why farmers used to have large families. You need to do this with others, whether it's with volunteer support or with paid staff. yeah, you definitely need that support. And that's where, again, having that community to fall back on has been incredibly helpful. And what would I do differently in the future? So I think as I move forward and want to plan for my future, I would want to look at owning or maybe co-owning property. Because while I really love living in community, it would just be nice to have that security and stability for the future. And the last couple of questions. So what advice would you give to people considering a similar arrangement? Number one, do it. This kind of collective model is amazing to learn from others, has been, as I've mentioned several times now, very helpful. Living on the land, if possible, is also such a great experience. I think it would be very different to have to commute to property than to be on the land where you're working, and to see the changes morning, noon, and night, and never having an excuse or not being able to go out to your crops because it's in your backyard. And so you really develop that kind of connection. The other piece of advice I would offer is to start small and to grow as you get to know the land and the people, as you wouldn't want to invest too much and realize this kind of model isn't working for you. Finally, I would also say it's important to find people who share similar values. We've been very lucky in our collective that we all share the same values in good land stewardship and in developing healthy, strong communities. So strong relationships with one another have been very important. So we invest time and effort into that, and it really shows. And the last question was, is there anything else that you think is interesting and important? The first thing I'd probably mention is, again, the financial independence. I think, and as a collective, we've talked about this, how it's probably really helped in not creating extra tension, because there isn't any dependence on one another in that way. We have our separate businesses and we can help each other out, but there isn't that tension created by trying to do it all together and figure out, have you done as much time as I've done, etc. And the other piece I'd like to mention here, what I think is interesting and important, is just the joy of living together in a community. So there's so much learning that gets done when working together. And yeah, it's just nice that you always have people around. So for example, in the past year with COVID, and I've felt very lucky living on the land with all these others, because then there's always, when you go outside, there's always someone to talk to, or we work outside still together. And we've been doing weekly boot camp classes outside and having bonfires. So I don't feel that the isolation that unfortunately a lot of people feel right now. So I feel very lucky. Yeah, and that's all from me. Thank you.
Pardon me. Thank you so much, Zandra. That was great. If people have questions, I invite you again to put it in the chat, and we will we'll do them all at the end. Next, I'm going to pass it over to Erin Richan. So you can go ahead and share your screen whenever you're ready. Thank you so much.
Here. I was just saying, this is my first Zoom presentation. There we go. Everybody can see that?
Looks great.
Great. Okay, super. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Erin Richan. Thank you, Zandra, for starting us off, and great to hear about your operations and really interesting stuff. So I look forward to the discussion after. And thank you, Eric and the NFU, for inviting me to come talk about my experiences. As Eric mentioned, I run Highland Gem Farm. I farm in Lanark County on a few different properties now, which is the traditional lands of the Algonquin people. Now, so I'll just start by introducing Highland Gem Farm, but a little bit of my journey since 2013. So Highland Gem Farm was started in 2017, and it started on basically 2 different properties. I had a business partner at the time who was also a romantic partner. And so we had his family farm to raise animals on because there was barns there, and I had rented some farmland in a little village called Elphin, at an existing old mixed traditional farm that was already a 5th generation farm, but they had a second house on the farm, so I got to rent that, which was fabulous. So I had my own house and farm and land to use there that I was renting, and then we had a secondary farm. So my story of Highland Gem Farm has kind of been cobbled together with working with what was available and also developing relationships in a new part of Ontario where I didn't grow up. And so I'll say that Highland Gem Farm, again, so it's rented land, and I started off small working on Pat and Lori Brownlee's farm in Elphin. And the first year of the operation was, well, maybe we'll go back, oops. Like I said, the first year of the operation was only a ½ acre, and we grew that from a market garden to having a little winter CSA in the area to 3/4 of an acre, and having meat pigs and meat chickens along with my partner in McDonald's Corners, which is 10 minutes down the road. So we had this kind of, it was close enough, which was great. We could commute, but and then once we decided to split as a business partnership and I took over fully in 2019, I moved it to a 1 acre market garden at Pat and Lori's farm in Elphin, market gardening and developing a summer CSA and dropping the winter CSA, continuing to do some meat pigs because there was a little bit of barn space and pasture space that I could use, but it was pretty restricted at Pat and Lori's since they were already a farm that had a herd of cattle and some chickens and pigs themselves. So sharing barn space was a premium. And then I had additional help, as Zandra mentioned. It's very difficult to farm alone. And so I was finding without a business partner, I met an amazing woman through the NFU, Ayla Fenton, and she came and helped out a couple days a week in 2019. And so she was helping to manage the farm and the market and everything, which was great. And then 2020, here we are, just the year passed. I had been living in Elphin and renting the house with another woman who was uninvolved with the farm. And the farm, in its evolution of going from a ½ acre to a very part-time ½ acre operation to a pretty full-time 1 acre market garden with now farm health volunteers and an additional farmhand who was living on the land as well. It became really busy, and there was a lot of tension in the house. So I asked if the roommate would leave and that I could take over the full house in 2020 to run my business and grow Highland Gem Farm even more, because in 2020 we had such a huge flux of wanting more local food in our small community. And so we tried to capture that, but housing kind of fell apart. Everything went into lockdown, and I actually ended up having to move from Elphin to another farm about 25 minutes away where I had apprenticed before in the area. And they offered me an acre to use in 2020 just to keep things going since seed had been bought and stuff. So talk about instability. It was a pretty crazy year, and it's a challenging part of having land partnerships. And so that's sort of where we are today. But before Highland Gem Farm, I actually had another partnership, which I'll just mention really briefly. And I think, there we go. I started in a small cooperative with 3 other farmers, young farmers. It was sort of a new thing for all of us, trying to figure out how to access land, but yet grow for our community. And that was in Guelph area. And that was called Fourfold Farm CSA. And I just wanted to, we'll talk about that actually in the next thing. So yeah, so we did that. That was a year where we all got our feet wet in farming, and then the personal dynamics, what that was really like, and realized that the 4 of us farming together weren't a good match. So we moved on. And so that's how I ended up in Lanark, apprenticing at Mapling Farm, and then sticking around and finding my own land to rent. So this is a little market shot in Perth. We did the Perth Farmers Market. We ran a nice summer CSA. This is a shot of the land in Elphin there. So just following sort of the questions, thank you, that Eric, you sent us. How have you decided to partner with? So I guess I've had 3 arrangements now, 1 in Guelph and then 2 in Lanark County. I'd say the one in Guelph, the original partnership, we were vendors at the farmers market for another farm at the time. and Guelph was kind of our community. So I think just finding people in the community, within the farming community, can ask around. So we met the landowners who own Fourfold Farm, if they would host us for a year as we sort of got our cooperative figured out and the business going. So that's how we decided with them. And then in Elphin, here's another shot of the farm here in Elphin. I just got really lucky in that I showed up one day on the farm to, I think, to pick up some eggs, and they had found out that the tenant who was living in the farmhouse was planning to leave, and they offered the place to me because I was looking for something in the area. Not necessarily looking to farm, but accommodations, which were slim, and they were looking for somebody who was keen on the farm life. So they offered me the place, and then being a 5th generation farm, they're in their 60s, they're sort of slowing down, but definitely wanted to keep the farm productive. They offered me an abundance of, whatever land I wanted to use within reason of their pastures and hay fields. And provided me with a lot of support to sort of get going, because I didn't have any tractor equipment other than hand tools at the time and seeds. So that's Elphin Gold. And then Maple Lane Farm, where I was this past year in 2020, was a farm in Lanark County that I had apprenticed with in 2014 and 2015. And so those guys were friends, and I continued to use their greenhouse when I started my Highland Gem Farm operations. They're 25 minutes down the road and had a greenhouse set up with wood heat and everything. So I always used that in the springtime. So we continue to be friends, and Hillary was always a mentor. And so she came through for me, her and her partner Nick, when I was looking for land this past year. So here's Ayla and our neighbor. Partnerships also are neighborly partnerships. So we were able to get a lot of help on the farm through volunteers and customers that way. So what kind of things have the farm? And there's another one we had. Oh yeah, Eric, you were here for this one. We did some work bees. Okay, so the host offer. So this is Laurie Brownlee on the left. I was there for 4 years living there, and then 3 years running Highland Gem Farm. And we've had, and steadily I've found that the hosts have offered land. Storage is always something tricky, is depending on how much stuff they have. Field implement, tractor use and implements use, just to get going as you're finding your own cash flow, capital, and sometimes those have been available. And then there's always an abundance of tools and materials I found on every farm that I've landed on. So those have been handy as well to negotiate into either borrowing or buying or using in kind. Water access, on-farm housing, which is definitely always a challenge. And so I've been lucky in the past 5 years with Highland Gem Farm is to always have my own separate space for the most part. And then mentorship, as Zandra offered, is just having somebody as a new farmer or just entry farmer, again, with not a lot of money, or just a new business startup. If you're starting small, the mentorship as to knowing the land and how do you fix tractors and how do you fix tools has been absolutely massive, or even just dealing with the health of animals. And I can't tell you how much the Brownlees have helped me sort of troubleshoot dealing with pigs that are not doing so well and you can't talk to, but they had some great ideas of patients and remedies. So, and what has been asked of me in the arrangements, it's always been very informal, I found in my experience. People are very keen to help young farmers get started. They've got 100 acres and they're not using it. And so that's the tricky part I found, and I'll come to that in challenges, but they've asked, if there's space that I'm living on, I've always paid for rent and utilities there. But as far as the land use, that one's been a bit harder to nail down, and it's definitely been different between every single landowner or land partnership that I've worked through. And often vegetables or farm products can be a pretty simple one that people are happy to exchange for. Time and labor is one that is also very, very common because, as you said, there's never enough time and never enough labor, I think, on farms to keep everything going. So we're always looking for more labor. And so inviting people onto land is often, I think, people see as a potential to collaborate. And so those are some pretty important things to be thinking about as a landowner or anybody entering into land tenureship, what your actual realistic expectations are of that. So things that have gone well, I would say for Highland Gem Farm, I'll speak specifically to that as far as land partnerships, is that it's been a very affordable way for me to start a farm business coming out of university and not having really any money and trying to figure out how to make a living farming. Being able to have affordable rent and then a way to barter either through labor or farm product for the use of the land has been massive. And so over the past 4 years, I have been able to buy a tractor, I've been able to buy implements, buy things for the market, start a CSA, buy bins, buy a walk-in cooler, all sorts of things that I would have otherwise had to figure out would have had to go into debt, which I don't think was something I didn't want to do. Yeah, it's just, you can't, again, it's been really helpful to do that. I'm having a hard time seeing everything I wrote here. Okay, just make sure I hit all the points. One things that have gone well as well, when I was in Elphin, again, like I said, it was a 5th generation farm that was kind of winding down, and they had a few chickens and cows and a couple pigs, but I mainly focused on vegetables there with a little bit of meat chickens on the side, but not being on a farm where there was different enterprises happening, not 2 market gardens or 2 pig operations or trying to pasture 2 different types of animals that require a lot of pasture was really good because it was more synergistic. We weren't getting in each other's way. We had complementary uses of the land. Whereas I found I had a really challenging year in 2020 working alongside a market gardener and literally sharing a similar, same block. We'd walk by each other every day. It created a bit of tension, competition, and I think that wasn't helpful and in the end wasn't a good fit for both of us. So it can be great to work cooperatively on the land, but certainly it can be challenging. So I would, moving forward in partnerships, certainly look for land opportunities if it is a working farm that you're exclusively doing something different and hopefully synergistic to what's happening on the farm. Again, mentorship is a huge part of land ownership, or partnerships, I should say, excuse me, that is invaluable and is something that I think if you can't value monetarily as you get into it, really take the time to put in hours on the farm and budget for those hours on the farm to work with the farm owner to just understand the land and skills to be had. And then I've just had a little bit of an experience recently while in BC with the Young Agrarians, and they have a land matching facilitator position that's paid for within the organization of Young Agrarians. And I was blown away by how helpful it was to have this facilitator at the virtual meeting of some land matching potential with another landowner. And they really hammered the questions that are sometimes difficult for you meeting somebody for the first time, interviewing for land or sussing out a land partnership. Can be intimidating to ask the hard questions of like, how much money, what do you think the economic potential is on this farm, and what exactly are you looking for, and trying to get those clear things. So having a facilitator or a mediator, if possible in any way, is something that would be very helpful if you're just getting into or exploring land partnership. And what's been the most challenging, I'd say, I'll put this challenging greenhouse situation for an example, but it's very personal in my experience. Nobody farms the same way or using the same methods. So, I think that people, if you're working alongside folks that they think they know more than you, or you think you know more than them, it can create tension. And I think that you just sort of have to be in check with what you're doing and understanding what you're doing, and also allowing people to express their own farming methods as they will, and understand that we all are going to farm differently, whether it's with chemicals or without chemicals, or intensively, or large scale. So Another thing is privacy and personal lifestyle choices. Is, you know, accommodations are very hard, so shared accommodations are pretty common, and especially in rural areas where you don't find a lot of accommodations. So trying to make sure your privacy, for me at least, was a huge thing, to have my own personal life aside from the farm and not have that be too intertwined with the personal life of if anybody else is living, if the landowners are living on the land. And just starting, as we said, starting small and with limited resources. And so that can be challenging because you're relying all of a sudden on needing to borrow the tractor, or waiting for the if they don't want you to use their tractor, waiting for them to come and plow your land or till your land, or do some cultivating. And so it is challenging if you haven't got a good framework or a good communication format, meetings or check-ins or schedule, to be able to figure out, how that relationship on using resources on land and timing of everything, because that can create a lot of tension, as well as just communication breakdown and just sort of the human emotional side getting into it. It's there, it's in every single partnership that I've gone through, land partnerships. So really figuring out whether it's a communications, methodology, nonviolent communication, or having regular meetings so that you can discuss things and don't let things go to the wayside when things are really busy in the summertime. And just trying to figure out how to have those tough conversations, because they have to happen sooner than later, always. And so I think coming to the end here, if there's anything interesting or important to share, well, I'd say moving forward, I would say if you're going to be going into land partnership, if you can really get your head around in the early years of starting your business, if you really want to buy land and focus on that, and that should be a goal that you should move forward to as quickly as you can, in a sense, because the more you're developing your business, the more it grows, and the more you accumulate, and infrastructure just becomes more expensive. So kind of figuring out when that would be. And if you're happy to be renting, then that's totally okay. And I think for myself as a person, renting would be great, because I do enjoy taking some time off and going traveling in the winter, or just being able to get away from the farm. So if I can get in a situation where I can rent long term and then have a bit more freedom, then that works for me. So you kind of want to figure out if you want to buy or rent long term. And like I said, look for synergistic operations on the existing farm or on neighboring farms. I haven't done holistic management, but I would talking with other folks, looking for some sort of decision-making tool that can help guide, is this actually aligning with my goals and going in partnership with these folks in this area, in this land? Does this feel right? And just sort of managing that guiding process there, and managing your risk. The Ontario Land Access Guide that was prepared by the NFU is great. So definitely going over that for ideas, advice, and agreements. And lastly, I would just say thinking, if anything that you go into, make sure you talk about exit. And I think that's also in the land access guide, because in my experience, I've had to exit some partnerships, and it's really hard, especially when you've put a few years into it and you've invested into land in ways that you won't recoup. So just to be really thinking about that is part of entering in and discussing and negotiating any sort of land partnership. So that's it for now. We'll talk more in discussion time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was great. Lots of great advice and experience there. All right, I'm going to pass it over to our final panelist, Mike Degagne.
Good evening, everyone. Let's see if I can be the only person to mess this up. It looks like I've got it. Everybody can see this. Marvelous. So thank you so much, Eric, and everyone else for participating in this. This work is something that's near and dear to a lot of us. These types of missions are important to the movement, and I'm just thankful to have the opportunity to talk about the things that we were successful with, and frankly, the things that we had a very hard time with. So I hope I hope there's something for everybody. Feel free to contact us afterwards as well to continue any conversation. And we'll just jump in. So I am the co-chair of the Black River Worker Cooperative. Founded it in partnership with my wife and landowner in Matheson, Ontario. The Black River Worker Co-op is a non-for-profit worker cooperative with the mission of returning the land and arable land, most importantly, to the commons, so that people who need it most can have access to it. So the farm you can see in this picture is located in between the Waterberg and the Black River in Matheson. So we have great water access. It's 173 acres that forms this top portion and this whole portion on the right-hand side of the road. And we've built our homestead sort of in this bottom corner here. How we ended up here, my wife and I were farming on a rented plot about a half an hour north of here. We were approached by the landowner with his intention of attracting young farmers, especially young families who were looking to farm regeneratively, to access the 173 acres that he no longer could manage on his own. This was a farm that had been in his family for all 73 of his years. It was settled by his father after they emigrated from Finland. It was literally his life's work. He had no children and believed strongly in cooperative living, especially having farmed in the region for that long. Matheson's a really small town, and you know, cooperative farming was just farming 70 years ago. That's just how everyone got by, shared resources, shared things like that. And he saw the value in that and wanted to make his land accessible for other people who wanted to do that. He also had no succession plan for the property. He didn't want it to be sold to developers or to someone who was just going to clear the land and grow canola or something like that. He wanted it to be more. He thought there was a bigger purpose for his land. And in the community and lifestyle preservation, Matheson has been a farming community. This area of Northern Ontario is the clay belt. There's a lot of rich soil, good for growing, but the sort of international, national, and provincial markets dictated that it was too difficult to compete. And so without the local economy and the local markets and the need for it, these farms have largely gone fallow, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your farming style, have been scooped up by largely by the Mennonite community. So that's the situation of where we're at and how we got here. These are my three beautiful children that are a large part of our farming operation. And this is a quote that came from the Fair Finance Fund, who has helped support some of the work that we do here anyways, and was born out of the local food and farm co-op. How we make it work on our farm, I noticed in the chat earlier, we're talking about collectives versus cooperatives. And I don't believe that cooperatives are the answer to everything, but they do offer some unique advantages. And we've tried to take advantage of both things here. So we formed a not-for-profit worker cooperative with the intention of holding the land, developing a trust for it, and developing infrastructure that would be mutually beneficial to the people who are living here and the people who are working here. The not-for-profit worker co-op would also employ the people that are living on the farm to ensure that they have stable, consistent, and meaningful employment. And the overall purpose of the not-for-profit cooperative is to make the land accessible to the community and to rebuild the understanding and the generational gaps that have happened in the last couple of generations, to reconnect community to land and therefore to their food. So in the process of moving here and working with the landowner, we developed a cooperative land ownership model, involved the development of the not-for-profit and the landowner donating that land. We created a cooperative succession plan for the trust, or well, there was still some questions directionally about land trust or conservation easements or how we were going to or are going to cooperatively succeed the land. And most importantly for us, to make sure that land stewardship was a part of the operations at the farm. And in a collective or with one governing body or one decision maker, we found it was not going to reflect the activities of everybody equally. And while we're all doing very different activities, everyone's under the same agreement of the not-for-profit worker cooperative who we all lease the land from. And so that way the board of directors is able to ensure that regenerative agriculture is used. There aren't any water management is really important for us up here, given that we're surrounded by mining communities and a lot of industrial agriculture. And sorry, I'm having a brain lapse. Regenerative living in terms of solar panels, completely off-grid living, and transitioning the connected grid portions of the farm eventually to off-grid. There's a little bit of the old portion of the farm in the back, and this is a new, well, this isn't exactly what it looks like, but it's a 3D rendering of our passive solar greenhouse that's built into the ground to help us withstand the northern climates. It also has a food processing and storage facility built into the back of it. We're hoping this year to be our first year growing 4 seasons, which has been quite a challenge in our northern location. So the cooperative mostly works on food security initiatives. We partner with other organizations like anti-hunger coalitions in the region to make surplus food and surplus seed accessible for community initiatives. We work a lot with local communities on education, are based around food and farming mostly, but also as it relates to lifestyle of living off grid and what that entails. We've done a lot of work, especially from my perspective, with the local food and farm co-ops, who I was on the board of directors for. We are members of, and I'm now a contractor for, working on cooperative models that deal with facilitating the difficult conversations between landowners and prospective farmers and bridging that generational gap where, you know, we're dealing with a 70-year-old farmer who is basically a farming encyclopedia, and I'm a 30-year-old man who has, you know, has learned almost nothing up to this point, even though I was born on a farm, and making sure that my kids aren't 30 years old before they start having a connection to their food is a big priority for us. We deal a lot with alternative economics. I was thrilled to hear people talking about bartering. We track our bartering on the farm, and in the past year have done about $75,000 worth of exchanges that we've tracked and valued and assessed. On average, we're operating at about $450 an hour of value when we barter. And we've broken it down into a couple different categories. I'm happy to talk someone's ear off about that. And of course, we focus on regenerative agriculture. Individually, we also have private for-profit businesses that we run from the farm that are complementary to the cooperative. So my wife and I operate Black River Foraging Company. We grow and harvest wild and produced herbs and medicines to create salves and products from. Northbound Bloom is a permaculture architect consultant who lives here and does most of our design work and is able to sort of live her lifestyle as an example for her work as well. I also am hopefully rolling out big microgreens this year, which will be coming out of our 4-season greenhouse. And Tenella Enterprise is the original farm owner who's been operating that business and continues to operate that business from the farm. So we have sort of both models. We work for the cooperative, but we also have complementary but separate businesses. My vision is eventually for the co-op to be so successful and efficient that it manages all of those businesses. But at the moment, while everyone's sort of working out their relationships with the co-op, it's been actually fairly advantageous to have both models. This took us 5 years to develop, and it's for sure not perfect, and it would take me probably a few more years to explain exactly the intricacies of all of it. Basically, the not-for-profit holds the land, is responsible for the farm and equipment maintenance, is responsible for the community initiatives, for reaching out to the community. We do community gardens here at the farm. We also do some in town. We do educational programmings with the school based around regenerative education, how food can be done anywhere. And the surplus comes from workshops or vegetable sales or any of the initiatives that we do goes back into building mutually beneficial infrastructure for the people on the farm. And the people on the farm are the homesteaders. Right now there's a husband and wife couple, my wife and our 3 children, and 2 more couples on the main farm. We are the member workers. We do all of the work for the Black River Worker Cooperative. We lease land for our homes and our personal businesses from the cooperative. I'm just going to move this guy out of the way. There we go. But we run those private businesses, but those private businesses are also able to share resources and labor from the not-for-profit, often in barter exchanges. So, storage facilities or growing infrastructure or implements that aren't used for the worker co-op are still available for the individual businesses. Basically, all of this is designed to make homestead life possible and private business still possible while running a farm. And then we have the community. The community is the other people that are involved in this relationship. They're looking generally to access food, to access land, retain their sense of community, especially in these small farming towns, and to access the education. The co-op gets its labor from the homesteaders and from volunteer from the community. That's usually given in exchange in some way for access to the farmland. Then through the sort of webs of connection, the community is able to get goods and services both from the private businesses and from the co-op, and the private businesses and the co-ops exchange amongst themselves, often for goods, services, or access, as opposed to money. So 5 years of this work and development got us to incorporation. 3 days before the incorporation date, we had an emergency meeting where we found out that the landowner was marrying one of the cooperative members, and they would not be pursuing the land sharing agreement that we had come up with over the past 5 years. This came about and this has been a year ago now that we've learned this, for what it's worth to look at what we would have done differently. There was certainly some communication gaps. One of the members of the cooperative was not participating in the meetings. She also had the closest relationship with the landowner, and upon review of the documents, although the landowner had agreed, she found it untenable for the cooperative to basically be making all the decisions as it pertained to who would be living and working on the land. Though that same process was true for everyone participating, and was sort of how we were trying to establish equity and fairness. I believe that there are some ways that we could have communicated better, ensured that everyone that was involved was participating and was on the same page. We also had some developmental gaps. Coming into this, we were all farmers. There were no experts in business. There were no experts in cooperatives, governance, problem solving, those types of things. And as I work with the LFFC in mentoring now, we're making sure to try and bridge those gaps as early as possible so that people can solve these types of issues at the front end as opposed to at an incorporation date. The other thing is to be clear for everyone on the vision and values of the project. These things change. They change throughout processes, and it's important to update them so that people aren't left chasing something that maybe necessarily isn't what they want any longer. Erin talked about having to move on a couple of times. That's okay. That's a natural process for these things in finding our right place to be. But if we're not communicating properly, often those are painful breaks as opposed to just people deciding that going their separate ways is the best. The other thing is documentation. We were able, fortunately, to have enough agreements and recordings of meetings and detailed notes to ensure that the roughly $100,000 of investment that we've put into this property won't be sort of taken away from us legally at this point. But it's not fun. It's not certainly not the process we dreamt of. And I avoided what felt like unnecessary documentation and formality, because everything felt so great and everything was, ostensibly going incredibly well up until 5 years. We had no real sign of any of this happening. And while it was acknowledged that it wasn't any of our doing, it still left us in a precarious situation that has us now looking to move our model elsewhere, which was the intention of the designing of the model, for it to be used elsewhere in Northern Ontario or Canada or anywhere else. So perhaps fitting that we're the first ones to have to try it somewhere else as well. So happy to entertain questions on that after, but I'm going to put my LFFC hat on for a second and tell you about the work that I do for the local food and farm co-op. So the LFFC's work is based around fostering a vibrant, resilient, connected, and sustainable food and farm co-op sector in Ontario. I am the Northeast Regional Coordinator. We have a number of coordinators that I'll pop up on the screen in a second. The work that, the LFFC does is as a second-tier cooperative. We're a co-op made out of cooperatives, and our function is basically to support our membership as much as possible in the early stages and throughout their business development, to make sure that co-ops remain connected, remain strong, and continue to grow in these movements in Ontario. So there's me. I am the Northeast Regional Coordinator, and we have a wonderful team of 5 other women. I'm sure everyone else has noticed in the cooperative and social enterprise industry, it's 60-70% women. Wonderful. It's certainly not a complaint. I think it's certainly a compliment to the work that we're doing, to be led by such strong and educated and capable women. I'm happy to be a part of the team at the LFFC. Highlight a couple of the things that we do. We have a really profound co-op toolbox that basically can take you from not understanding anything about cooperatives all the way through the incorporation process. We often have events, seminars, webinars. Co-op toolbox, co-op on your desktop is our new. It's a program that we're working on altering as well to be part of our mentorship program, that basically from home gives you the ability to either convert a business into a cooperative or start a cooperative from scratch, or combine a number of businesses into a cooperative, and the support that you'll need along the way, because so many of us are farmers first. In our development, we found 3-4 years in that we were starting to get a grasp on what even we were as a cooperative and how we fit into the sector. So it was really helpful, and we're trying to get that help to people sooner in their development, so that they can see if co-ops are the right move for them to make. Something I want to highlight, a shameless plug, we have an assembly coming up March 9th through 11th on the topic of resilience. We've got a group of incredible speakers. I'll list a couple here. Just move this out of the way again. Sorry. So we've got Don Morrison, who's our keynote speaker. Charles Levko, doing a session on post-pandemic food futures, BIPOC food sovereignty and farming with Cheyenne Sundance. Belinda Lee from Food Systems Lab at Simon Fraser U. Again, BIPOC food sovereignty and farming. This is just a sample of who's presenting and working with us at this assembly. Obviously, to COVID, everybody's going to be online and sort of meeting that way. It's our first time doing an online session. I know everybody's sort of been a part of them. If you are interested in coming, I'll be sharing the links with everyone after. We are also hoping to hear back from our main sponsor today or tomorrow about offering subsidized attendance options for people who are financially unavailable or prohibited in some way from going. And for BIPOC organizations in Ontario, there are free tickets available. So just trying to increase that accessibility for everyone. There's a ton of great people that are presenting there, but also the conversations that happen afterwards are incredibly valuable to your development. They certainly were for us. So the LFFC is focusing on changing its model a little bit from being less dependent on provincial and national funding to be able to focus more on meeting the needs of its members specifically, as opposed to the wishes of whatever granting agency we're hoping to get money from. That's hopefully culminate in cooperative conversion and core mentorship programs, succession and land connection programs that we're in discussions with, similar to Young Agrarians and the work the NFUO is doing here in Ontario, connecting farmers to land that's available, and other membership classes and options for larger and smaller co-ops to be a part reflective of their involvement in the cooperative to create financial autonomy and sustainability for these types of support organizations that are so important to the development and growth of food and farming, especially regenerative, cooperative and sustainable systems in Ontario. Thank you all so much, and fire away with your questions about how upset we were.
Thank you so much, Mike. Lots of amazing resources there. So now that all of our panelists have had a chance to speak, we've got a bunch of time for questions and discussion. So if you would like to ask a question or maybe even share a short reflection about how your own kind of land partnership journey has proceeded, you're welcome to do that. If you want to type something straight into the chat, we can go ahead and read that aloud, or if you want, you can raise your hand, which you can find the little hand raise button in the participant panel of Zoom, or just unmute yourself and jump in or turn on your video, and we'll know that you're trying to get our attention. Great. So Mike, I think you can probably stop your screen share now, and then we can all look at each other in the gallery.
Sure.
Great. So thanks. So I'm going to start with a question that just popped up from Allison Taylor in the chat. Question for all speakers: tips and tricks on communication on the farm, i.e. community board, having weekly or monthly meetings. What do you think about that? Who would like to start? Zandra, you're unmuted.
I can start on
Maybe
that.
I will. Oh, sure, Mike, go for it.
So it's incredibly important to maintain that communication, and meetings are a great way to do it. But when you're farming and trying to get 7 people into the same meeting, it can be difficult. For us, we focused on structured monthly meetings and casual weekly sort of check-in. Sometimes there was a beer, sometimes it was while we were working, but whenever we could get into the same space to have those weekly check-in meetings, and then issues didn't go for the whole month without being addressed often.
Thank you. Zandra, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something that we talk about a lot within our group. Why does it work so well for us? And we think it's a mix, and something I think we've all touched on, and the person who wrote the question, like weekly or monthly check-ins have been important for us. And yeah, the truth is, in the middle of farming season, sometimes that doesn't happen because we're all so busy. So it is like trying to, what is the term, like corral cats, and it's just, it doesn't work. But at the same time, when things do come up, and we think it's a mix, the fact that we're all really into our own personal growth. So when things come up, it's important for us to address them right away before they fester. And that really works for us because we really value the strength of our relationships, as I've mentioned. So we don't want things to get bad. So we deal with them honestly and right away with the mindset that our relationship is more important than anything else. So we, so that kind of like encouches everything. And in addition to that, the landowners, and I think of my mother who was a teacher, and she always talked about how important a principal is in a school, and the landowners are just really great, kind, generous people. And so they just set the tone. They don't like conflict. So again, when things come up, things are dealt with, and not in a confrontational type of way, but in a way to like, with a mindset of resolving. So all those facets come together, And it's a bit of work and a bit of luck. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Erin, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I'll just say that it's very much dependent what systems of communication or modes of communication you will have is to who you're working with in your partnership. So for example, I find I use my phone a lot for communications for my business and personal stuff. And if I had an experience with more recently this past year where finally I had a landowner that got a phone and I could just text them when there was just a little something that needed to be communicated. And I couldn't believe what a breakthrough that was in just dealing with the small things that really needed to be dealt with two very busy farm operations going on at the same time. So that's in the heat of the summer. Whereas you know, if you're working very closely and it's a busy operation all around, then weekly meetings absolutely make the time, talk about what's going on the farm on all aspects, just so that everybody's conscious of the comings and goings and the space required and any potential, you know, conflicts of space and resources that could come up because things change all the time. So, but if I've also been in a situation where I'm incredibly independent from the operations of the landowners, or maybe, you know, they were just living there essentially. So I kind of could do my own thing, and we just had check-ins, you know, in the springtime to make sure the plan was clear, what was going on, that the rates haven't changed, or if they are changing, what we're going to be paying for the land and the resources and the utilities, and then just sort of the expectations of the year, and that can flow well. But yeah, so it just depends on how independent you are or how much you're relying on the partnership, and then yeah, figure out some modes, whether, you know, even just emailing is great, because, you know, a farmer I worked with, old school farmer, he was in the barn from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. at night, and you just didn't really catch him because he'd be in the tractor otherwise on the field. So he would email me kind of at like 2 a.m. and I could get those in the morning when I woke up and was drinking coffee, to just sort of get those notes of they needed some help in doing some haying or anyway. So yeah, figure out what works for you and the other folks that you're farming or sharing the land with.
Wonderful, thank you. We've had a few related financial questions come up over the course of the chat. So a question for Erin and for Zandra, if you feel comfortable, what is the rent that you're paying or we're paying for land? And is there a going rate for land leasing with no infrastructure? Question for Mike, do people in the co-op get paid a wage? Zandra, would you like to start?
Sure. So the rate that we pay, we've all acknowledged, is very minimal. And we're lucky for that. And I think that comes from the landowners. They're not in this for financial gain. You know, they're retired, they have what they need. They just want to see the land used productively and well. And the community aspect is really important to them. So I'm on about half an acre. It's hard for me to judge because I have pieces of land all over the place here, because some parts are more wet and some more dry. So, but I think it's about half an acre, and I pay about $450 a year season.
Thank you. Erin?
Sure, yeah. So the original fourfold farm, I think we traded vegetables. It was very loose, it was very casual. They were just had some extra land and some forest space where we set up accommodations. And so that was non-monetary. And then when I was renting in Elfin, it was a similar situation to Zandra just saying. They were owed nothing on the farm, 5th generation farm. So I paid $850 a month for the house, which included water, utilities. And then I kind of took over small plots of land and expanded, and that was sort of included. And just I helped out on the farm when I could. So, and I found that like in the part of Ontario that I have been living, rural housing, whether it's an apartment or, you know, a house, is about $800 to $900 a month. And then that sometimes includes the utilities, or you have to pay for utilities on top of that. And then this past year, I forgot to mention, I also rented half an acre 4 acres in Balderson, which is quite close to where I was farming at Maple Lane Farm for storage crops. We tried to do some oats as well, some hulless oats for production consumption. And so I had 2 agreements going in 2020. And at Maple Lane Farm, where I had a whole acre, I offered, and it seemed sort of a fair arrangement, was $150 a month to have access to water for irrigation, space for storing my things, and general and use of the land. So maybe that's on the higher end. And then the 4 acres in Balderson, I paid for all of the custom tillage work and plowing and everything. And we rated that at $500 for the year for that land.
Thanks. And Mike, same question plus, do co-op members get a wage?
You muted halfway through there, Eric, but I think I picked up on the question about the payment model for our co-op. So because we do so much bartering, and I'm not particularly interested in starting a fight with Revenue Canada, every hour that is part of our exchange, we pay a living wage that we've set at $20 an hour, reflective of sort of the increases in costs living in Northern Ontario. So everybody that works for the co-op, including volunteer members or people who are outside of the co-op membership but coming from the community, single mothers make up a large portion of the people that are coming to volunteer here. Everybody gets paid $20 an hour. So it's a good way for us to push money out into the community, often into areas where it's needed. We also offer sort of co-op credits where you can exchange, instead of taking money, you can have vegetables or access to something else. And that's how we generate revenue for the not-for-profit, because, you know, I'll do something in my private business for $100 an hour that I'll do for the cooperative for $20 an hour, and that surplus goes into the cooperative. And it sort of forms our conversations around bartering as well, where we can agree to exchange goods for services, or access, or services for services, or whatever, so long as we agree that my time is no more valuable than your time as a person.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. Question for all of the panelists. Cheyenne Sundance asks, what do y'all think about incubator farms? I'm on the fence to start one, but don't know if they are helpful to new farmers looking for land. Who would like to tackle that one first? Erin?
I haven't actually been a part of an incubator farm, but I just wanted to say that in sort of my early years of apprenticing and getting going, Terry Young at Green Bean Farm ran a really awesome incubatorship. And so I think that was a model that was really great. It was sort of an incubator. She had instead of an internship, she had some space on the farm dedicated for folks to start their own enterprise, and was really open to the different types of enterprise, whether that was animals or perennial herbs, trees, or vegetables. And anybody I know who went through that program that she had, I'm going to call it a program because she was quite structured and organized and very professional, came out with a wealth of experience and a lot of resources given to them. And I think that they could negotiate more than 1 year. So some people were there for longer than a year as they got their business going and had access to these resources. So I think that model is really good. I've seen with Farm Start, I think it was, has had a few incubator farms. Anyway, the model, it would be something to research, but I don't think that they've worked out necessarily all that well for some of the farmers. So some case studies to be looking at would be the Farm Start models.
Maybe I'll go next. Just to say, I don't think I can speak to this question because I don't have any experience with it. So I'll put it to Mike, see if you have some wise words.
I don't have a ton of experience with it either, but from what we're developing with the LFFC in terms of mentorship, And from what I know, just from experience, it's unbelievably important, especially at a young age, for people to be making connections with, not the guy growing a carrot in his backyard, but somebody who has a serious understanding of soil and water and health and all of the really important precursors to, can I grow food effectively? We're looking at possibly starting some incubation work in partnership with educational groups, universities especially, in training younger and younger people in the importance of this, so that the next generation coming up behind us will already have the understandings that we've worked so hard to sort of pull out of lost knowledge.
Great, thank you, Mike. So that question was about incubators, where people can have access to a small amount of land for a little while, and then are intended to move to a different place once they get established. This question from Shannon Nguyen Shannon Wynn, pardon me, is the opposite. Some of us new farmers are interested in purchasing small farmland, just like 1 or 2 acres to start, but those options don't seem to exist. Just wondering if there's something like a lease to own, that someone can lease an acre or 2 from a farm for several years, and after that, own it if they choose. Who would like to speak to that?
I don't know necessarily about lease to own options, but I do know that there are options for long, very long leases that can potentially accommodate something that you're doing. Especially if you're not, knowledge of the land, of the specifics of the land is really important in establishing a farm, and not just going somewhere necessarily with the intention of forming that land to your vision, but working with what's available. And so sometimes 5 or 10-year lease can be more effective than purchasing a property that might be more difficult to part with. For instance, the plot that we're on is stunning and beautiful, and the neighbors to the north and the south of us just plowed maybe 800 acres of forest, and will be tile draining their canola fields into our water source. So kind of glad maybe that we don't own this land at this point. It doesn't necessarily mean, like, not owning the land doesn't necessarily mean that you can't ensure access to it. I'm not necessarily the best legal expert on this, but I do know that there are long-term lease options available that can give you sort of strength of consistent access without needing to buy entire portions of land that aren't often available. You're right.
I have a tip maybe to add. There's a farm near us in Sunderland, Ontario, called Wheelbarrow Farm, and I believe they offer that. Now that's an I believe, so you might want to check out their website, but I think they do offer that option. So that's Wheelbarrow Farm.
Thank you. Erin, did you want to speak to that?
Oh, I would just say that it would be a great program for getting access to farmland for new farmers, for sure. And I wonder if there's potential in the future for land trust to have that mechanism built into. Anyway, who knows? But yeah, I think it's a great idea, but I don't know of it existing anywhere.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that this is a challenge that a lot of people at our land linking workshops have talked about, that often they want to start a business and really just use a few acres, but the farmland available is, 100 acres and maybe costs $500,000 or $800,000 or $1 million, and it becomes inaccessible. I think that a lot of the connections people have made so far have been more informal, that they make a connection with an existing or established farmer who has some extra land that they're willing to maybe give a like 99-year lease on, or even sever and sell, although there are some restrictions on severing and selling agricultural land for good reason. If you are trying to find a connection, one resource that a lot of people use is farmlink.net. Which has kind of landholder offerings, some of which are relatively small in acreage, although they aren't necessarily offering to sell that chunk. All right, a few more questions from Julie Maxwell. Questions for Zandra and Erin. Were there any times you made permanent investments in soil / land / infrastructure on borrowed or rented land? How did you negotiate with landowners, or were there creative ways that you worked around making permanent investments, i.e. mobile infrastructure? Who would like to start? Erin?
Sure. I have acquired a couple shipping containers that store things, which can be moved and placed in places that they can be moved. I borrow as much as possible, and that's if there's a regional food hub. That we had a food hub for a short while, so I used that for storage for the winter time and processing in the winter time, so that I didn't have to build anything. So really, I focused for the first 3 years for sure on just making it work. I didn't have a cold cellar. I just had a basement that was about 10 degrees all summer, and it worked great for overnight, market stuff. And then converted just a chest freezer for $40 with an Inkbird to just do greens and stuff. So being very creative and keeping things low cost was, and when you're getting to the point where you're like, I need to build some infrastructure here, you really need to reevaluate your whole plan as to, am I ready? How long am I going to be here? How secure do I feel? And really evaluate that before just kind of charging ahead and being like, oh, everything's going great, I think we'll be good. And as far as creative, something creatively, if you do want to have cold storage for vegetables or flowers, for example, or need it, is, and I think I first saw that at Broad Fork Farm out in Nova Scotia, but an insulated trailer, cargo trailer with a cool bot is pretty cool, because it can, you can pack a lot in there, and then you can also move it, and it's a lot easier than a shipping container and cheaper. And what were some other things? I think, anyway, off the top of my head, that's what I'd recommend.
Yeah, I would say a few things. Things that are permanent infrastructure development projects, the landowners would usually put up the costs for it, knowing that it'll be here for them and their family to enjoy in perpetuity, whereas we might be coming and going. Yeah, so, and then that said, I generally haven't put in or had big thoughts in putting more projects on the infrastructure projects on the farm, because personally I like to keep things small and simple, and to me it's the joy of farming, and I don't know, I like to keep it simple, and the more complicated things get, the more hardship and the more things you have to look after, and so that just, it's not my way of being. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say really briefly that I have definitely walked away from hundreds of dollars of fencing and gravel for driveways and wash station areas and stuff. So some things just as a tenant farmer, that you just have to, you need those things necessarily for your operation. And all the farmers that I've partnered with and leased land from are already living on a pretty tight budget, very tight budget. So I don't feel comfortable asking them to absorb a lot of those kind of costs to make myself more comfortable as a farmer and to run my business there, as I feel that the land, usually they're quite generous with the price of land or use of land and resources on the farm. So yeah.
Thank you, Erin. And there is one question specifically for you, Erin, that came up earlier. Did you commute to your new farm in 2020? And if so, how did you find commuting compared to living on the land?
Oh, I would 100% live on the land if it was the opportunity. I commuted to the only time I've had to commute to land was the half acre, and it was designed to just be storage crops, curcubits and brassicas and beets and carrots, and then field crops of oats. So it was designed to be very hands off for most of the season. And I ended up, I tried a landscape fabric for a number of things to just reduce any sort of field work that needed to be done there. And I would say it's just, unless you're planning to go there every single day, it was sort of out of sight, out of mind. And I've had other gardens plots that are out of sight, out of mind, and deer can get in. And if you're just away for a few days, so much can go wrong, and you just don't have an eye on it. So unless you're planning to be there every day, depending on what type of operation you're running. But speaking of vegetables specifically, I really recommend, if you can figure out a way to live on the land, is just, it makes your life so much easier. Forgetting things, having to go on the weekend to open the greenhouse and close the greenhouse. It gets super hot because the clouds go away and you're like, it's all of a sudden 40 degrees in the greenhouse and you're, you know, half an hour away. It's just, it's the worst. It will drive you crazy, and it's very expensive, gas wise and time wise. So
yeah,
I wouldn't do it again.
Thank you, Erin. Did any of you else want to speak to the issue of housing at your farm or for shared farming? Because that has certainly come up quite a few times. Zandra, is that something that you want to speak to?
I'm lucky that I do live on the farm. There was accommodation available for me, so that's been really helpful. But it is an issue for others that want to come on board. And I mentioned in my presentation, that's something that stops a lot of potential farmers here, that there isn't accommodation and they would have to commute. And it's often people wanting to come up from Toronto to try something, and that would, it's over an hour away, so it's just too far. So the problem, we'd like to have more housing here, but there's a lot of regulations that stop us. So it's something that actually we've been discussing with the NFU to see if there's some work that can be done with government agencies to move this along. But it's an issue for us for sure.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to speak to that? I know that just popping up a tent doesn't quite do it when the temperature goes down to -40 at night.
So we moved out here in August, actually, into a tent. We sent the kids away for a little while, and we took the time between August and December to build our first iteration of the cabin. Yeah, design is incredibly important, and we found that our cooperative strength came not just from strong people or from farmers, but that Jen, who does all of our permaculture design and consulting, has been an incredibly valuable member of our team and brought more efficiency to the farm than you know, any amount of potatoes that I could put on my back or anybody else could lift or carry. So creativity and research and extensive planning is going to be your best bet to solving housing. We have a couple of different combinations of tiny houses here, some on wheels, some not. We have some fixed infrastructure. We sort of run the gamut on things that we've tried. We also do a lot of prospector tents for accommodations in the summertime. We barter a lot for labor, especially in the construction of our passive solar greenhouse. And we actually bartered with a canvas tent maker so that we could get access to a bunch of tents as we needed them, and equip them with wood stoves so we could extend people's stay into the fall. And yeah, it's creativity. And as long as you don't tell too many people about it or put it on Facebook, municipalities tend to not bother you too much, at least in Northern Ontario.
Thanks so much. Another question for everyone. Kiki asks, when you have when you each have shared land alongside other farmers, were you able to successfully work together in terms of combining crop plans to grow things that you each grew well, or perhaps even sharing farmers market space or supporting each other's businesses in other ways? Erin, would you like to start with that? You're unmuted. Oh,
sure. I would say not growing the same crops. I think I toiled with the idea, especially this past year when I sort of last minute moved to a farm that already had a market garden. I thought, oh, doesn't it sound silly that we're going to have leeks over here and then leeks like just over there too when we grow all our leeks together, right? But unless you are using all the same equipment, the same bed setup, the same systems, it really becomes kind of complicated to crop plant together. Like even, you know, my bed spacing and vegetables was different than the farmer that I was working with, and she cultivated with a horse and I used a tractor or hand tools. So it can get a little bit complicated. And so I personally do not want to go into that sort of synergy, because everybody's pace is different as well. Yeah, I think I'll just say that I don't think that would work personally. I don't see it working well unless it's somebody that you've worked with in a different capacity and know exactly how they work, and you've got it well organized and written out.
Yeah, I can go next. Yeah, there's a lot of issues could come up in that kind of setup, as Erin mentioned. So I guess what we've done in the past, when some of us have been at the same market before, we're careful to bring different things, so grow different things. Or if it is something if we are bringing the same thing, like kale, we'll price it the same, you know. And so thankfully, I thought it would be worse than how it actually turned out. The market we went to was really busy, that we all left happy. And it was actually quite helpful to have my friend at the same market, because if I forgot something and he hadn't left the farm yet, I can call him to bring an extra sweater or bring that. Or so it actually turned out to be quite beneficial for us. And and then sometimes it's also helpful. For example, I've been doing CSAs, and most years, my carrots don't turn out very well. And so I'll barter with the other farmers to get their carrots, and I'll give them something else. So it's helped me quite a bit. And then the other piece I'll mention that has been great is we've learned to, and we just started last year, to grow a few crops together that we call our survival crops. So things like potatoes, legumes, just things that we have for ourselves and our families over the winter time. And it was just really fun for us to be conscious of growing those crops together. And yeah, so it was time spent together, and it ended up being also a really very beneficial for our relationships to do that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, no, our situation's a little bit different because the priorities on our farm are, first, we grow for ourselves and for our survival. Secondarily, we grow and produce things for our businesses and for next year's production. And then third is what we sell. So most of our work is in reducing our living expenses as opposed to profiting from farming. But the markets that we do attend, we attend as the not-for-profit organization. So we have a collective field that we all agree to grow on every year. It's usually staple crops, carrots, potatoes, garlic, rutabaga, things like that, that store well, keep well for other people throughout the year. And then we all have our own individual plots, and on those plots we're able to be more creative. We're also not all farmers. My wife and I are the only ones who are actually selling produce here. The rest of the businesses here are complementary or otherwise affiliated. So we don't really have that competition issue. We do community gardens that we have to sit down and agree on, but we also allow the free space that we, for whatever reason, don't ask me why, we grow a watermelon plant every year, and through a year or months and months of struggle, we get one watermelon this big that we cut into 5 pieces at the end of it. You know, it's just, that's not for everybody. It's something that we've chosen to do on our separate section. And yeah, so having that flexibility of there are shared things and there are private things here makes it so that we avoid a lot of those arguments and discussions.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you. I'm going to ask you a question, which is actually more about cultivation production. What routes are there for farming according to the Fukuoka method in Southern Ontario? Can anyone speak to that on our panel?
Is that like this One Straw Revolution guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, seed balls and so on.
Mm-hmm. I don't have experience with that. I'm sorry, I can't speak to it. I'll be honest.
I've experimented with cover cropping that way, but not actual crops. field production vegetables. But I know that the EFAO and Ken Lang, and I think there might be some other farmers in Ontario involved with Ecological Farmers of Ontario. They do farmer research trials, and they are broiler crimping cover crops and then planting into them. And I think that anyway, I haven't caught up on the details of those projects, but they're definitely doing some interesting green manure cover cropping and planting into that, whether it's garlic or other crops. So I would direct you to the Ecological Farmers of Ontario Farmer Research Project.
That's a great idea. Yeah, people
I
can
was going
find
to say
them
the exact same thing.
Cool. Nice.
Perfect. Their website is efao.ca. I do think that we have gotten through most of the questions. So if you have asked a question that I've missed, please do put it in the chat, or if you're ready to jump in, raise your hand. I have a question that ties into our next and final workshop, which is happening 2 weeks from now. We have someone who is looking to buy land on Manitoulin Island and is looking for partners to pool some money and kind of have enough resources to be able to afford that. What advice would you have for someone who's in that situation, who's maybe a younger farmer, who wants to farm with other people, but hasn't decided what kind of arrangement in terms of collectives or co-ops they're actually going to use to hold that land? What advice would you give?
I would
Mike,
say connect with as many organizations as you can. And something that we're trying to do with the LFFC, and I would have been helpful for us in development, is you can't always afford the right amount of mentorship that you necessarily need, especially as it relates to the complexities around cooperatives. But find some funding for it. There are funders out there. Get in contact with the LFFC. We can help find that mentorship and facilitate that. I know the Young Agrarians as well and the NFUO have done a lot of that work. So get that, have those discussions ahead of time. Talk to everybody that you can, and more often than not, you'll find more connections in those conversations than you could have just looking on your own. And also, is it someone here that's looking for land in Manitoulin Island?
She's going to be listening to the recording, but she's not in that. She had a conflict.
Well, when you're listening, let me know. I'm also looking for land in Manitoulin Island. It's a consideration for us. And yeah, give us a shout.
Eric, I also saw that there was a question about, someone asked Mike about what decision-making process the co-op uses to determine what to do with surplus income.
I did see that,
Sure.
and I know that Mike answered part of it in the chat. I just want to make sure that Erin and Zandra have a chance to answer the question about arrangements before we move on.
Oh, sure.
Actually, when you asked the question, it cut out for a moment, so I didn't hear the full question. Could you repeat it?
Of course. So there's someone at a upcoming workshop who is looking for people to buy land together on Manitoulin Island. So what advice would you offer to someone who's trying to decide what kind of arrangement they want to have to own land collectively, whether that's a co-op or some other arrangement?
I would say, yes, start really simple. I think Mike's suggestion to talk to as many people as possible is good. Yeah, you wouldn't want to jump into some big arrangement and then find it just doesn't work. So, I mean, I've only ever come into one arrangement, which was this collective. So I can only speak from the experience I know. And this has just worked really well for me to find, before you even go and buy land, to find some land that you can experience the territory and the people and the culture and see if it works for you before you even jump into buying land and deciding whether it's a collective or cooperative. It seems like a very big decision. And yeah, so I would start even smaller than buying land, just rent for a little bit.
Erin, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that just briefly that the idea of getting together and buying land sounds really great, but firstly, like to finance that is like through a bank or depending on how you're going to do it, it's not that easy to just buy land unless you can buy it cash, you know? So one thing is just sort of thinking about for sure the structure, whether Mike said, as he said, echoing cooperative. I know folks who have 10 parties that bought a piece of land and they incorporated and you know, it was separated through shareholders basically, and it's very casual, the group of people they get together and talk about it, but legally it's got its own entity that protects everybody, and then if anything changes, then it's easy, there's easy exits, and also just being able to buy, you kind of have that incorporated setup, and that works I think easier in whatever financial way it's going to work out. But also echoing that it's a huge thing to jump into, and especially if you don't know folks, that's just a bit crazy. I'm just going to say that's crazy, and that really get to know each other and work in a low pressure sort of situation before you jump into buying land. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, and there was a question for Mike about the co-op and how you decide to do with surplus income, which I know that you've answered at least partially in the chat. Did you want to speak to that further, Mike?
Yeah, sure. I'll just, in case anybody wasn't following along in the chat, as I mentioned, we sort of have a prioritization of decision-making around here, primarily to serve the people that are living here and make our lives better, to make sure that our businesses are able to continue to work from this land, and then to serve the greater community. And every decision that we make with surplus has to check at least 2 of those boxes, preferably all 3. For instance, we just recently decided to buy a commercial dehydrator. We use it to dehydrate a lot of our food that we're storing for the year. You know, any value added things that we're doing for ourselves. My wife and I also use it for our business, and we've also made it accessible to a couple of people in the community who have either usually exchanged labor or something for access to these types of things. And yeah, there's been a couple of ties where we have a sort of scoring rubric for how much benefit is coming according to the priorities and how much value it's bringing to us and the community. And sometimes we end up in a tie, and then we'll do something funny like flip a coin, or who can throw a rock the farthest, or we mix the targets up and shoot stuff at them and, you know, see which one we put a hole in, and that's the one we do. We don't, because everything has to benefit us and our businesses and the community, or 2 of those things, we don't usually miss on, you know, if it's not something that I particularly wanted, it's for sure going to benefit my life and potentially my business or my community. So that's how we sort of score and rank what we do with the surplus.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that we have been able to ask or to answer everyone's questions. Oh, there is a new question popping up from Corinna. Does the modern farming lifestyle bring you more joy or challenges? Who would like to start with that one?
It brings more of both for us. I mean, we've chosen to do it off grid and by hand a lot. So there certainly are more challenges, but I find the joy in your successes are greater. We could not have possibly imagined that in, you know, end of 2019, 2020, there would be a global pandemic for which having food storage for season growth and seed security would be really important. We were able to sort of quarantine and lock down with 17 of us here at one point. We were all in the same bubble. A couple of them were super old, so we went and did all the town stuff for the old people. And, you know, we were sort of able to pass through this. We had our best financial year ever. We had our best production year ever. We've never felt more secure in our community, even given the sort of disruption in the land ownership model. So yeah, physically it's harder, emotionally it's harder, time constraints are more difficult, but the more aspects of the community that we build in, the easier it becomes. You know, I haven't plowed our driveway once this year, for instance. The neighbor does it, and I haven't even had to think about it. So, you know, that alone to me is worth, you know, a couple 100 pounds of vegetables anyways. So yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Erin or Zandra?
You want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it struck me how you said modern farming. I don't really know what you mean by that. I guess because I don't really farm what I consider very modern in the sense. I don't use any machinery. It's all hand tools. I don't use a tractor, so no-till method. And so I find so much joy. I think that's what attracted me to farming in the first place, just the physical labor. I love working outdoors, working with my body. So I get a lot of pleasure in that. And yeah, that helps with, and it echoes my motto of just keeping it simple and keeping to the simple joys of things. Yeah, and how Mike was talking about, it's the community aspect that's been such a joy that I didn't anticipate. I mean, I guess it also brought me into this in the first place. I fell in love with the land and the people. That's why I stayed after the internship. But I never thought of myself as someone who'd want to live communally. But now after experience this model, that there's so many different ways of doing it that can work for you. And so I couldn't imagine turning back. I couldn't imagine now ever living independently. I'd want to live in community. Yeah.
And I'll just finish by saying that I think that the farming lifestyle is the best lifestyle, with all of its challenges that are rewarding and heartbreaking and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's worth it. It is very challenging, and it's financially very challenging. And so yeah, does it bring you more joy? So I'd say joy, but I think the challenges of land access have sort of overcome me right now. So I'm taking a break in 2021 from farming, just to reassess how to move forward with land security so that I feel more secure in building a bigger and stronger business and in my community. So yeah, it's a balance for sure.
Wonderful. I think that those are the perfect answers to end on for this evening. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. I'm going to click on my reactions window and press the little applause icon. It's been so great to have all of you here and to share your experiences and your insights with us. I hope that our panelists and our participants will join us for the very final workshop of the series, which is happening 2 weeks from now. That's going to be on Thursday, the 25th at 3:30 in the afternoon. It's going to be an hour long. It's going to be part of the NFU Ontario AGM and convention. So as part of that workshop, we're going to be hearing reports from other events in this series. So we're going to be hearing some of the things that we learned from our workshops with students at post-secondary institutions. We're going to be getting a report as well from Cheyenne Sundance about the workshop on land access for Black, Indigenous, and people of color farmers that happened earlier this week. And then we'll be hearing from some people who have land opportunities available. So if you're a farmer who's looking for land or land access, I would really encourage you to come to that as well and hear some of those short presentations that will be made as part of that 1 hour workshop. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're going to end the formal proceedings here, and I hope that you all have a wonderful night. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.